and welcome to the Pastimes Media series. The Ghost Dance came to Standing Rock in 1889. Major James McLaughlin sent BIA Indian police to arrest Sitting Bull in an attempt to halt the Ghost Dance. Sitting Bull died in the attempt, and Bigfoot took his band south to Pine Ridge, where the followers of Red Cloud and Crazy Horse lived. Here is yet another perspective to that sad incident at Wounded Knee. On December 28, 1890, Bigfoot's band was stopped near Porcupine Creek. Bigfoot ordered his men to raise the white flag. Major Whiteside of the 7th Cavalry parleyed with Bigfoot and then escorted the Sioux to Wounded Knee Creek, where the 7th was camped. 2 troops of the cavalry took the lead, followed by an ambulance with Bigfoot as patient, and wagons with the Sioux herded behind them, and finally 2 more cavalry troops with a battery of Hotchkiss guns. When the 7th and the Sioux reached the cavalry camp at Wounded Knee, they were counted at about 120 men and 200 women and children. After camp was established, Major Whiteside ordered station 2 troops of cavalry serving as sentries around camp, with the 2 Hotchkiss guns placed on a rise overlooking the camp. Later that night, Colonel Forsyth arrived with orders to take Bigfoot and his band to a military prison in Omaha, Nebraska. With Forsyth's company were a few spectators and Father Francis Craft, who was to use his influence with the Sioux as a black robe to persuade them to come in peaceably, as Father John Jutz did with the Shichangu chief Two Strike earlier that month. Forsyth then placed his 2 Hotchkiss guns beside Whiteside's. Father Craft's account says that after Forsyth made the peaceful speech and asked the Sioux to surrender their arms, the Sioux denied they had any. Forsyth then sent men into the Sioux camp to retrieve any arms they found. A medicine man began to pray and sing. Some of the Sioux came forward, one by one, to leave their weapons, and when about 20 guns were collected, a trooper spied arms under a blanket and cried out, "Look out! Look at that!" followed by nervous laughter on both sides. Forsyth assured them that he would not take their arms by force even if he had 10 years to do it. Father Craft was walking among the Sioux, calming them as best he could, and passed out cigarettes. Then several Siouxmen threw aside their blankets and raised their guns level to B and K troops. Craft remarks that many of the Sioux had the repeating 12-shot Winchester rifles. Craft ran along the lines with Sioux men and begged them to stop. The Sioux line of riflemen laughed and began to lower their rifles except for one. Craft identifies a deaf-mute called Black Fox, who was unable to comprehend what was happening and then fired off a round. Craft further says that the Sioux women and children were standing behind the Sioux soldiers looking on when the 7th retaliated with their own fire. The Sioux broke into small parties and tried to break past the lines of the 7th soldiers. Hotchkiss gunfire mowed down any and all in its line of fire indiscriminately. Scouts ordered the women and children down, but likely were not heard over the gunfire or couldn't understand English, and few obeyed. Caught in the crossfire, Father Craft tried to give absolution to a dying 7th Cavalry soldier and was accidentally shot by him. A passing Sioux tried to bring Craft to his feet, but this was seen by the white soldiers as an attack on the downed soldier and the priest. White soldiers raised their guns to fire on the Sioux, but Craft pushed him down and interjected his body between the soldiers and the Sioux. Another Sioux aimed at him, saw Craft push down the Sioux and the soldiers ready to fire, so he stabbed the priest. Craft paints a different picture of the 7th Cavalry, that after the firefight was done, soldiers carried the bodies of the children off the field in their coats, with many of them breaking down and crying. Craft was Mohawk as well as part Welsh. He was called to the priesthood because of his native heritage and would not have endured the trials of religious profession for any other purpose. Craft became an adopted member of Chief Spotted Tail and his family, and was soon recognized amongst the Lakota as Wambali Chicha Aglachbaya, the eagle that covers its young, or simply, hovering eagle. He became a relatively fluent Lakota talker and encouraged the traditional dances and songs. It would seem that Craft would have little reason to lie about what happened at Wounded Knee, and he told the truth as he saw it. D. Brown says in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, after breakfast, Colonel Scythe ordered the Sioux to disarm. Brown, going on native sources, says that the guns were stacked in the center. When there weren't enough weapons piled up, the soldier chiefs ordered their men to go and render bundles and lodges to retrieve more. They found 2 more guns and compensated their axes, knives, and tent stakes. A medicine man named Yellowbird began to sing and dance a few steps. One of the guns belonged to Black Coyote, a deaf man but not mute, according to Brown's native source. Black Coyote shouted about how much he paid for the gun and raised it above his head. Soldiers grabbed him, and though he hadn't even pointed it at anyone and the gun, somehow Black Coyote was spun around, and as he spun, the gun went off. Brown's Lakota sources agree that Black Coyote was a man of bad influence and that he fired his gun aimed at no one, likely in the hopes of keeping it. Brown quotes Louise Weaselbear as saying, "They shot us like we were buffalo. I know there are some good white people, but the soldiers must be mean to shoot children and women. Indian soldiers would not do that to white children." Brown estimates that as many as 300 of Bigfoot's near 350 were killed or mortally wounded. 4 men and 47 women and children were taken to the fort at Pine Ridge and left in the open, at least until the Episcopal mission there opened. General Miles pressed charges against Forsyth for the murders of women and children, but Forsyth was exonerated. The Sioux were outraged and united at White Clay, just north of Pine Ridge. Their encampment there numbered about 4,800 warriors. On December 30th, 1890, the Sioux ambushed the 7th Cavalry at Drexel Mission, and a small skirmish followed until the Buffalo soldiers of the 9th Cavalry came to the rescue. Meanwhile, General Miles quietly surrounded the Sioux with a force of 3,500 men, and what nearly turned into the Lakota's last stand became complete surrender on January 15th, 1891. John Keegan writes in his book, Fields of Battle, that soldiers caught up with the last hostiles at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota surrounded them, and when they refused to be disarmed, opened fire with automatic cannon. Within a few minutes, 150 Sioux were dead, and within the month, Native American resistance to white power in the continent was over forever. Custer had been avenged. The 7th Cavalry paraded its color to mark the surrender of his rifle by Kicking Bear, the last fighting Indian chief. General Miles' words regarding Wounded Knee were that the rudeness of the white soldiers frightened the women and children, and reports that a remark was made by one of the soldiers, that when we get the arms away from them we can do as we please with them, indicating that they were to be destroyed. Some of the Indians could understand English. This and many other things alarmed the Indians, and a scuffle occurred between one warrior, who had a rifle in his hand, and 2 soldiers. The rifle was discharged and a massacre occurred. Not only the warriors, but the sick chief Bigfoot and a large number of women and children who tried to escape by running over the prairie were hunted down and killed. Mr. Will Robinson, Secretary of the South Dakota State Historical Society from 1946 to 1968, said, "It is the Army viewpoint that they were not only dead but bad Indians and deserved what they got. This is not realistic, but it is the apparent Army line dating back into antiquity. It is the basis of their denial of the right of the survivors to compensation. It is not based on fact or sound logic, but on a guilt complex so strong that they gave out Congressional Medals of Honor to the participants in the Wounded Knee affair, and 12 more to the people who did next to nothing at the Mission and White River fracas later, of which were of minor importance. They built a great monument at Fort Riley eulogizing the dead soldiers in this lamentable affair. When one considers that in World War II, 64,000 South Dakotans were engaged for the better part of 4 years, and that they received only 3 congressional medals, the incongruity of the Army's attitude towards Wounded Knee is emphasized. The Congressional Medals of Honor given out to the 18 soldiers represents a heavy burden of conscience for the U.S. Army. Did Bigfoot have to go to Pine Ridge at all? This is a question for some discussion, and I'd like to hear from you. Please leave a comment or a response in the boxes below. For the Past Times Media Series, I'm Dakota.